You're making a career-ending mistake.
The rain was the kind that didn't fall so much as press down on everything cold, relentless, the sort of November rain that finds the gap between your collar and your neck and stays there. The wet asphalt of Birchwood Lane smelled like old copper and cut grass, and the only sounds were the distant hum of a cruiser engine and the sharp, ugly crack of a man being shoved face first against the hood of a rental car. The man did not fight back. That was the first thing that should have told Officer Dale Pruitt something was wrong, because in 11 years of working the street, every man Pruitt had ever slammed against a car had flinched, cursed, pulled away, or gone limp in that particular way that meant they were thinking about running. This man did none of those things. His breathing stayed measured and slow. The breathing of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of pressure, who had been in rooms far more dangerous than a wet suburban street, and had learned that the most powerful thing a person can do when the world is trying to break them is simply refuse to break. Pruitt laughed, pressing down harder on the back of the man's neck. "Comfortable down there, pal," Pruitt said. The word pal came out the way a boot comes down, deliberate, weighted, designed to remind the other person exactly where they stood. The man's cheek was against the cold metal of the hood. The rain drummed against the roof of the car, and in a voice that was almost conversational, almost gentle, the man said 4 words that Pruitt would spend the next 3 decades replaying in a federal prison cell. "You're making a career-ending mistake." Pruitt shoved his head down another inch and laughed louder. There were 3 things Pruitt did not do in that moment. He did not look at the badge folded into the inside pocket of the man's navy hoodie. He did not run the plates on the charcoal gray rental sedan, which would have returned a registration to the United States General Services Administration. And he did not even for 1 second seriously consider the possibility that the calm black man he had just put on his knees in the mud might be someone who outranked every person within a 10-mile radius. In less than 9 minutes, the radio would stop chirping and start screaming, and Dale Pruitt would finally understand what kind of animal he had just put in a cage. Rewind 40 minutes. Birchwood Lane in the North District of Oak Haven was the kind of street that existed in a separate category from the rest of the city. Gas lanterns on stone posts, hedges trimmed to a mathematical precision. Houses set far enough back from the road that you couldn't see the front doors from the sidewalk. The average home on this street cost somewhere north of $800,000. People who lived here did not expect to see a charcoal gray sedan parked at the curb with its engine off and no one getting in or out of it. Special Agent Marcus Webb had been sitting in that sedan for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and he was very good at being invisible. He was 44 years old with dark skin and the kind of eyes that missed very little sharp analytical, the eyes of a man who had spent 20 years learning to read a room before walking into it. He was broad through the shoulders, built from early mornings at the boxing gym and late nights hunched over case files, and tonight he was dressed in a navy hoodie, dark jeans, and worn Timberland boots, deliberately unremarkable, deliberately forgettable, the visual equivalent of background noise. There was a thermos of lukewarm coffee in the cup holder that he had stopped bothering to drink an hour ago, and on the passenger seat, half buried under a folded newspaper, sat his federal credentials and his service weapon. He was the assistant special agent in charge of the FBI's Chicago Field Office Organized Crime Division, and he was here because of the man in the house across the street. 412 Birchwood Lane was the residence of Councilman Victor Marsh, locally beloved, regionally connected, and according to 4 months of financial forensics, the central figure in a money laundering operation moving somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 million through the city's construction contract system. Marcus had not come tonight to arrest Marsh. The case was not ready for that yet, and Marcus Webb was not a man who moved before he was ready. He had come tonight to watch, specifically to watch who arrived at Marsh's home in the hours before tomorrow's city budget vote, because he had reason to believe that tonight's visitor list would tell him exactly who else was on Marsh's payroll. He adjusted the heat vent, which wasn't blowing. He watched the curtained windows of 412 and waited. The discipline required to do what Marcus Webb did for a living was something most people fundamentally misunderstood. It wasn't about action anyone could act. It was about stillness, about the capacity to sit in a cold car on a cold street and trust the process, to believe that patience was not weakness, but strategy. He had learned that lesson early in his career, and it had saved his life more than once. He saw the cruiser appear in his rearview mirror the moment it turned onto Birchwood Unit 7 Oak Haven PD, rolling slowly enough to be deliberate. Marcus felt the particular tension that lived in his chest whenever he was a black man in a wealthy white neighborhood without his badge visibly around his neck, even after 2 decades of carrying it, a tension that never entirely went away no matter how many years he had or how many cases he had closed. He kept his hands relaxed on the wheel. He did not duck. He did not reach for anything. Federal protocol: don't act guilty and you won't look guilty. The cruiser slowed, rolled past, and then its brake lights flared red in the rain, and it stopped and began to reverse. Marcus exhaled through his nose, slowly, deliberately. "Don't do it," he thought. "Just keep going, officer. You have no idea what you're walking into." The takedown lights erupted white and blinding, flooding every corner of the sedan's interior, and Marcus placed both hands flat on the steering wheel, fingers spread wide, and began thinking 3 moves ahead. In the driver's side mirror, Marcus watched him come. Dale Pruitt walked the way certain men walk when they have never been told no by anyone who mattered, with a heavy, deliberate swagger, shoulders rolling slightly with each step, chin up, one hand already resting on the butt of his holstered Glock before he had covered half the distance between the cruiser and the sedan. He was a big man, thick through the chest and neck, with a red flushed face that suggested either high blood pressure or a permanently elevated sense of his own importance, and he filled the space around him the way certain men do not, because of what they say, but because of what they assume. Pruitt had been with the Oak Haven PD for 11 years. In that time, he had accumulated 3 commendations, 6 excessive force complaints, and a reputation among the department's quieter officers as someone you did not contradict in front of others. Every one of those complaints had been reviewed by an internal board and dismissed. Every single one. Pruitt had learned from that pattern the lesson it was designed to teach, that there were no real consequences for men like him in a department like this one, that the system had been built to absorb his behavior rather than correct it, and that the badge he wore was in any practical sense a license to define who belonged where and who didn't. His read on the man in the sedan had taken approximately 4 seconds to form and had not been revised since black male hoodie parked outside a councilman's house on the most expensive street in the North District at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. In Pruitt's calculus, that math had exactly one answer. 6 feet behind him, Officer Tommy Birch, 24 years old, barely 8 months out of the academy, growing a mustache that hadn't quite committed to the project, yet positioned himself near the rear bumper of the sedan with his hand hovering near his taser, trying to look like he knew what he was doing and feeling with increasing certainty that something about this stop was off. Birch was young enough to still feel the wrongness of certain situations before he had the language to name it. He felt it now. He didn't say anything. Pruitt reached the driver's window. He did not introduce himself. He did not state the reason for the stop. He shined the flashlight directly into the driver's eyes, not to see better, but to blind, which is a different thing entirely. And in the flat, bored voice of a man who has never once been surprised by how a traffic stop ends, he said, "License and registration now." 2 men, 1 window between them. One who saw a suspicious male in a hoodie. One who saw a local officer making the worst decision of his life. The rain fell between them, indifferent and steady, and the night moved forward. Marcus rolled down the window with the slow, deliberate movement of a man making sure every action was readable, narrating as he went. Hands on the wheel, not reaching for anything, happy to provide identification, and then in a voice that was deep and entirely steady, he said, "Good evening, officer. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a federal agent conducting an active surveillance operation. My credentials are on the passenger seat under the newspaper, and I have a service weapon in a concealed holster on my right hip. I'm going to remain completely still unless you direct me otherwise." Pruitt put the flashlight in his eyes and said, "License and registration, now." Marcus tried again, keeping the same measured register, using Pruitt's name from the badge, something he had clocked in the first 2 seconds. He said it clearly, he was a federal agent. The vehicle was a GSA fleet rental. His credentials were 12 inches to his right, and Pruitt was welcome to them. All Pruitt had to do was look. Pruitt didn't look. The precision of Marcus's language, the way he named the legal basis for the stop, the way he used procedural vocabulary without hesitation, had registered somewhere in Pruitt's chest, not as a warning, but as an irritation. The way a man who has never been corrected hears correction as an attack. He leaned closer to the window and said, "Don't you reach for a damn thing. Get out of the car." Marcus tried a third time, "Officer, I need you to understand, if you force me out of this vehicle, you are compromising an active federal investigation. Please just look at the credentials on the seat," and Pruitt laughed and told him to save it for the judge. The calculation Marcus ran in that moment was not emotional. It was mathematical. Fight back. And a nervous officer with his hand on a Glock interprets it as a threat, and Marcus Webb does not go home. Comply, the investigation is blown, months of work evaporate, but Marcus Webb goes home. The choice was simple, even though it tasted like swallowing glass. "I am complying," Marcus said, and unbuckled his seatbelt. He stepped out into the rain. He was 3 inches taller than Pruitt, and for just a fraction of a second, the physical reality of that shifted the energy on the street. Pruitt's eyes flicked up and then hardened, the way a man's eyes harden when something challenges his sense of the established order. He told Marcus to turn around and put his hands on the hood, and Marcus did, and pressed his palms flat against the cold, wet metal of the rental car, and felt the rain on the back of his neck and the smell of the wet road rising up around him, and started with the focused precision of someone building a federal case from scratch to memorize everything. The time on his watch, 9:17 p.m. The specific words Pruitt was using, the specific procedures, Pruitt was skipping the sound of Birch's boots shuffling in the wet gravel 8 feet behind them. Uncertain, unhappy present. Pruitt's hands patted him down aggressively. The rain drummed against the hood. Pruitt's hand found the holster at Marcus's hip, and the word came out of him like a reflex, immediate and total gun, and the word detonated the stop. The way a single match detonates a room full of gas, burning through every layer of procedure and replacing it with something hot and formless and very dangerous. "It is a service weapon," Marcus said, and his voice had climbed exactly 1 register the first time it had done so since the stop began. "I am FBI. Do not escalate this." Too late. The word gun had already overridden everything. Pruitt grabbed Marcus by the shoulders and drove him down to his knees in the mud at the roadside, one knee going into the soft wet earth, the cold rain immediately soaking through the denim, and Pruitt was shouting at Birch to cuff him now, and Birch was rushing forward looking like a man who was doing something he already knew he was going to regret for the rest of his life. The handcuffs bit into Marcus's wrists with a cold metallic certainty, and Marcus Webb cheek, 6 inches from the wet grass at the edge of the road, made a decision. He stopped trying to change what was happening. He started recording it instead, not with a device not yet, but with the part of his mind that had spent 20 years constructing federal cases from raw materials, cataloging everything with the patient thoroughness of someone who knows that the detail you miss in the moment is the detail you lose in the courtroom. He noted the time, the exact words, the absence of probable cause stated at any point during the stop. The fact that Pruitt had never once looked toward the passenger seat where the credentials were sitting in plain sight, the specific contemptuous phrase Pruitt muttered under his breath as he hauled Marcus upright by the handcuffs, a phrase that landed with the weight of something practiced, something habitual, something that had been said before without consequence. Marcus's left hand, as Pruitt yanked him to his feet, pressed briefly against the front of his hoodie, a gesture that looked to anyone watching like a man bracing himself against the pain of being jerked upright by his wrists. It was not that. Across the street, through the rain, he could see the curtains at 412 Birchwood shift. Councilman Marsh was watching from the window. The surveillance operation that had taken 4 months to build had just been blown in 4 minutes, and Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not panic, not anger exactly, but a cold, clarifying fury. The kind that doesn't burn hot, but runs deep and runs long, and doesn't stop until the accounting is complete. As they dragged him toward the cruiser, he said quietly and without drama, "I want you to remember this moment. I gave you every chance." Pruitt shoved him into the back seat without answering. The back of a police interceptor is designed to be exactly as uncomfortable as it needs to be to remind you of your situation. Hard-molded plastic, the faint chemical smell of industrial cleaner layered over something older and less identifiable. The cage divider pressing close enough to your knees that there's nowhere to put your legs that doesn't remind you they're restrained. Marcus sat with his hands cuffed behind him, keeping his breathing steady, watching the front seat through the scratched plexiglass. Pruitt was riding the adrenaline high, drumming one hand on the steering wheel, checking the mirror every 30 seconds with the look of a man who has just told a very good story at a bar and is waiting for everyone to agree. Explaining to Birch how he had read the situation perfectly, how the suspect had been squirrely from the start, how this was exactly the kind of thing that separated experienced cops from rookies, how you had to trust your gut even when the guy gave you a speech about federal agents. The words poured out of him with the ease of someone who has been in the habit of narrating his own competence for a very long time. Birch said nothing. He was staring straight ahead through the windshield, and his jaw was tight in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Marcus leaned forward as far as the cuffs would allow and spoke through the partition with the same measured tone he had been using since the stop began. "Officer Birch?" he said, and Birch flinched slightly at the sound of his name. "Run the plates on the Malibu. It's a fleet rental registered to the U.S. General Services Administration. Then run the name Marcus Webb. Do those 2 things in that order, and I promise you the next 10 minutes of your life will go very differently than the 10 after that." "Don't run a damn thing," Pruitt said, eyes in the mirror. "We book him John Doe until he decides to talk." "You left my credentials in the vehicle," Marcus said. "That's a procedural violation. You also left the car unlocked on a public street with a federal service weapon inside it. That's a felony negligent storage of a government firearm. I'm not telling you these things to frighten you, Dale. I'm telling you because the clock is already running." "What clock?" Pruitt said, and his voice had changed just slightly, still dismissive, but there was something underneath it now, a hairline crack in the certainty. Marcus explained it quietly, the way you explain something to a person who is about to make an irreversible mistake and deserves to know. The smartwatch on his left wrist tracked biometric data and reported to his team. His heart rate had spiked at 9:17. His GPS had stopped moving at 9:19. His team had a 9-minute distress protocol. The math he told them was simple. Pruitt laughed. It sounded almost right. But in the passenger seat, Tommy Birch had already reached for the onboard laptop. The silence that followed the sound of his typing was the kind of silence that fills a room after someone has said something that cannot be unsaid. Birch's breathing changed, first a sharp, involuntary intake, and then he said very quietly, "Pruitt, just the name, nothing else. Just the name, and the way he said it like a man holding something fragile that he'd suddenly realized was already broken." "What?" Pruitt said. "Pull over." "I'm not pulling over." "Garrett?" "The first name." "Pull the car over right now." Pruitt swerved slightly when he turned to look at the laptop screen, and then the color left his face the way water leaves a cracked glass, fast complete, leaving something pale and wrong behind. The screen was flashing a red banner that he had never seen before in 11 years of running names through the system, and below that banner was a photograph of the man in the back seat. But the man in the photograph was wearing a suit and looked at the camera the way people look at things they have already decided to take apart. The title beneath the photo read, "Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Organized Crime Division, FBI Chicago Field Office." Pruitt dropped the mic. It swung on its coiled cord back and forth in the silence like a pendulum counting down. From the back seat, Marcus Webb said, 9 minutes, Dale. You have 9 minutes." and then the radio crackled to life, and it was not the dispatcher. It was Chief Gerald Sutter, and his voice was tight and controlled in the particular way that voices get when someone is trying very hard not to scream, and he was ordering Unit 7 to stop the vehicle immediately. They came out of the rain like something inevitable. 6 black SUVs materializing from the dark at both ends of the road, simultaneously cutting across all lanes with the smooth, practiced coordination of people who have done this many times before and find it neither exciting nor difficult. SWAT vehicles mounted the curb. The helicopter arrived from somewhere above the tree line with a sound that you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears, its spotlight dropping through the rain and pinning Officer Dale Pruitt's cruiser to the asphalt like a thumb pressing down on a beetle. Inside the car, Tommy Birch had stopped breathing in any useful way. His hands floated over the dashboard, doing nothing, reaching for nothing. The hands of a man whose entire understanding of how his evening was going to go had just been surgically removed. Pruitt stared through the rain-slicked windshield at the wall of black steel and the figures emerging from it, moving with a fluid, unhurried precision that was nothing like the way patrol cops moved, carrying carbines instead of pistols, and on the back of every tactical vest in letters large enough to read through a windshield in the rain, FBI. The loudspeaker boomed from the lead SUV. Not a request, not a warning, but the voice of an institution that had decided it was done being patient, and Pruitt's ego, which had been inflating for 11 uninterrupted years, came apart like paper in water. He looked in the rearview mirror. Marcus Webb was watching him through the cage, not with triumph, not with anger, with something quieter and more final than either of those things. The profound, exhausted disappointment of a man who had tried to prevent an accident and watched it happen anyway. Pruitt rolled down his window. He threw the keys. They clattered onto the wet road and lay there. He opened the door and stepped out into the light, and the experience of walking backward with his hands on his head into a wall of federal agents, feeling the rain soak into his uniform, and the weight of every eye in that intersection settle on him, was something he would not find language for until much later, sitting on a concrete floor in a prison cell, when he would finally understand that this was exactly what it felt like to be on the other side of the thing he had been doing to people for 11 years. Strong professional hands spun him and pressed him against the hood of his own cruiser. SAC. Raymond Cole stepped forward. A man in a trench coat with the face of someone who had been solving problems like this one since before Pruitt had graduated the academy, and read him his charges in a voice so flat and so certain that it sounded less like an accusation and more like a weather report. Marcus was helped out of the back seat, carefully treated with the matter-of-fact consideration of a colleague returning from something unpleasant. A dry jacket went over his shoulders. The handcuffs came off. He rubbed his wrists once, looked at the mud on the knees of his jeans, and walked to where Pruitt was being held. He looked at him for a long moment. 11 years, Marcus said quietly enough that only Pruitt could hear it. And you never once looked at the badge. That's not a mistake, Dale. That's a pattern. He turned and walked to the rental car. He did not look back. The decision to go to the precinct rather than the field office took Marcus approximately 30 seconds to make, standing in the rain outside the rental car while Cole's team processed the scene around him. It was the line that decided it. We run this town, 3 words that told Marcus everything he needed to know about whether Dale Pruitt was an isolated incident or a symptom of something deeper and more entrenched. A man who says we when he means I is a man who has been backed up before. And a department that backs up a man like Pruitt for 11 years has not done so by accident. The Oak Haven PD's Central Precinct building was a heavy, brutalist structure that had always seemed to Marcus, in the reconnaissance he'd done as part of the Marsh investigation, like a place that had been designed to communicate authority rather than serve the public concrete and glass, and not a single welcoming surface anywhere. Tonight it looked like an anthill that had been kicked sideways. The lobby was full of agents at every terminal. A tactical team held the exits. The local officers stood against the walls with the specific hollow look of people whose understanding of their own power had just been fundamentally revised, hands near their belts, but nowhere near drawing. Chief Gerald Sutter intercepted Marcus in the middle of the bullpen, a man in his mid-50s, white-shirted, and sweating through it trying to invoke jurisdiction with the increasingly desperate energy of someone who knows the argument is already lost. Marcus walked directly to him, pulled the federal seizure warrant from his back pocket without breaking stride, and pressed it flat against Sutter's chest. All dashcam footage, all bodycam logs, and all arrest records for the past 3 years, Marcus said. The warrant was signed 40 minutes ago. Your building is a crime scene, Chief. I'd recommend you find somewhere comfortable to sit down. He walked past without waiting for an answer. The interrogation room at the back of the building was exactly what Marcus had expected. The same 4 walls, the same two-way mirror, the same fluorescent tube overhead that blinked with a nervous, irregular rhythm every 30 seconds, the same scratched metal table bolted to the floor. Pruitt had sat across this table from hundreds of people and leaned on them, worn them down, made them feel small in a room designed specifically to amplify smallness. Now he sat on the other side of it, cuffed to a ring in the table's surface, his chest heaving slightly, his eyes moving from the mirror to the door to his own hands and back again. Marcus came in alone. He set a plastic cup of water on the table and a thick manila file folder and sat down across from Pruitt and did not speak. He opened the file and began to read from it, not to Pruitt, just aloud, like a man reviewing his notes before a meeting. Dale Pruitt. 11 years. Oak Haven PD. 3 commendations, 2 for drug busts. 6 excessive force complaints, all dismissed. And then Marcus looked up. You own a boat, Dale. A Sea Ray 270 purchased 14 months ago. He looked back at the file. $75,000. Cash transaction. He turned a page. Your annual salary at the time was $62,000. Pruitt said it was an inheritance. Marcus told him they had checked. Both his parents had died with negative net worth. There was no inheritance. What there were, Marcus continued closing the file with the deliberate patience of a man who has no reason to hurry, were deposits, small ones $8,000 to $9,000 each, structured carefully enough to stay just under the IRS reporting threshold, appearing in Pruitt's personal account on a 14-day cycle, tracing through 2 shell companies to a construction logistics firm that had received 12 city contracts in the past 4 years. Contracts approved by the city council. Contracts that came to vote under Councilman Victor Marsh. He watched Pruitt's face work through the stages. Denial, then calculation, then something that looked very much like a man measuring the distance between where he was and somewhere he could not reach. Marcus leaned forward and laid down the bluff with the calm of a man who has done it before and knows what it looks like when it lands. He said that Marsh had flipped, that Marsh had provided a list, that the list had names on it, and that one of those names was why Marcus had been sitting outside 412 Birchwood on a Tuesday night, not to surveil Marsh, but to confirm what Marsh had already told them about who was keeping his meetings private. Pruitt shattered the way certain men shatter all at once, completely, with a sound that was almost a relief. He gave up Sergeant Wade Rollins. He gave up Officer Carl Blaine. He said he would testify he would give them everything, he just needed a deal. Marcus stood up, stood. He walked to the door and knocked twice and turned back once. You'll testify, he said, because you have no choice, not because you get a deal. He stepped into the hallway. Cole was waiting with the digital recorder. Pruitt had just confessed to corruption on tape in the same room where he had spent 11 years collecting confessions from other people. Marcus told Sutter the department was under administrative review, walked past the row of hollow-eyed local officers, and stepped back out into the rain. His knees were still muddy. He felt despite everything lighter. The leak did not come from Marcus. He was too disciplined for that and too aware of the case implications. It came from Tommy Birch, or more precisely from Birch's attorney, who in the process of building an aggressive immunity argument had allowed the dashcam file from Unit 7's hard drive to be included in a public records request filed by Pete Garvey, a local investigative journalist who had been covering the Marsh corruption story for 6 months and had an instinct for the document that arrives like a gift. The video went live the following morning under the title Oak Haven Cop versus FBI Agent, The 9-Minute Mistake. By mid-morning, it had cleared 300,000 views. By noon, it was north of 2 million. By the time the dinner hour arrived on the East Coast, the clip had been shared across every major platform embedded in articles from outlets that Pruitt had never heard of, and some he certainly had, and the 9 minutes of dashcam footage from a rainy Tuesday night on Birchwood Lane had become the most watched video in the country. What made it impossible to look away from was not the violence. There was no shooting, no physical fight, but the clarity of it, the way you could see the whole machine working in real time. You could hear Marcus calm and precise explaining his credentials, explaining the investigation, explaining with patient thoroughness why this stop was a mistake, and you could watch Pruitt absorb none of it. You could hear the exact moment Birch's voice changed when the laptop returned its result. You could see Pruitt's face in the dashcam's rear-view angle when the color left it. And you could hear crystal clear the 3 words that became the caption on 10,000 memes and the headline on 100 news segments. "We Run This Town" followed 8 seconds later by the image of 6 black SUVs closing off both ends of the road. At Pruitt's house on Garland Street, the notifications began before he finished his first cup of coffee. By the time he walked to the window and looked through the blinds, there were 4 news vans at the curb, 2 national affiliates and 2 locals, and a reporter on his lawn speaking into a camera, with the particular composed urgency of someone delivering a story they have been waiting for. Pruitt's mentions were flooding with people he had not thought about in years, people from his high school, people who had been on the receiving end of his traffic stops, people from other states who had never been to Oak Haven and never would be, all of them watching, all of them commenting, all of them present for his unraveling. Cheryl Pruitt came through the kitchen at 9:15 in the morning carrying a single hardshell suitcase, dressed in a charcoal blazer and pressed slacks. Her hair pulled back, wearing the face of a woman who had made a decision sometime in the night and was finished making it. She was not crying. She moved through this kitchen with a purposeful composure that was somehow worse than anger would have been. Pruitt tried to explain. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said the video was missing context. He said he had a plan, he had a lawyer, he was going to beat this. She just needed to give him time. He said he needed her, which was probably the first entirely true thing he had said in the conversation. Cheryl stopped at the kitchen doorway. She looked at him not with rage, which he might have found easier to meet, but with the kind of pity that carries no warmth in it at all. "I saw the video, Dale," she said. "Everyone saw the video. And what I saw wasn't a cop making a mistake. What I saw was who you actually are." She picked up her suitcase. "And honestly, you weren't even smart about it." She walked out. The front door closed with a sound that was not loud enough for the occasion. 40 minutes later, a tow truck backed into the driveway and began hooking up the Sea Ray, the $75,000 boat that Pruitt had been so proud of that he had shown off to every colleague who would listen that he had paid for in cash from money he had convinced himself he had earned. The operator handed him a clipboard without making eye contact. Bank had called the loan due. IRS had frozen the asset simultaneously. The cameras caught all of it. Pruitt standing in his driveway in gray sweatpants, unshaven, watching his boat disappear down the street on the back of a flatbed, while a reporter shouted questions from behind the news van. The image circulated within the hour, next to the dashcam still of his face when the laptop screen went red, and the contrast between the two, the man who had said, "We run this town" 12 hours ago, and the man standing barefoot at the edge of his driveway watching his possessions be repossessed, was the kind of image that requires no caption. Inside the house, his phone lay in 2 pieces against the baseboard where he had thrown it. Outside, the news van's engine idled. The world had rearranged itself entirely, and Dale Pruitt was the last to know. The Federal District Courthouse in downtown Chicago was a different universe from the county municipal buildings where Pruitt had spent his career doing his version of justice. The ceilings were higher, the marble was real, the seal of the United States hung above the bench with the particular authority of an institution that had survived longer than anyone in the room and intended to survive longer still. The air smelled of mahogany and old floor wax, and the particular kind of seriousness that accumulates in rooms where consequential things have been decided for a long time. Pruitt sat at the defense table looking like a man who had aged several years in the months since the arrest. His face drawn, his hair thinner at the temples, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit across the shoulders because his good suits had been seized as evidence of purchases made with money he was going to have to explain. His court-appointed attorney, a public defender named Morris Finch, was a capable man, doing a genuinely difficult job defending a client the entire country had already convicted on dashcam footage, and he had the look of someone who had not slept a full night since the assignment landed on his desk. Across the aisle, Assistant United States Attorney Diane Okafor arranged her files with the unhurried precision of someone who has never in her professional life needed to raise her voice to make a point. She was sharp-featured and entirely still in the way that very confident people are still, and she had a reputation in federal court for cases that by the time they reached a jury felt less like arguments than explanations, as though the verdict were simply the logical conclusion of a sequence of documented facts that had been laid out too clearly to dispute. Next to her, in a charcoal suit, sat Marcus Webb, the same man who had been on his knees in the mud on Birchwood Lane, now looking like the version of himself that Pruitt had never bothered to consider. Judge Patricia Howell took the bench with the efficiency of someone who does not regard ceremony as an opportunity to perform. She tapped her gavel once and looked at the room over her reading glasses and said, "Let's begin." The prosecution's case was not flashy. It was something better than flashy. It was thorough. And thoroughness in a federal courtroom is the most devastating thing you can bring to bear on a lie. Okafor walked the jury through the dashcam footage twice, the first time in real time and the second time frame by frame, annotating each moment against the relevant statute. Here is the point at which proper identification was offered. Here is the point at which procedure required the officer to verify credentials. Here is the point at which the word gun was used to justify an escalation that the evidence shows was not warranted. She did not editorialize. She did not ask the jury to be outraged. She asked them to look at the sequence of documented events and tell her what they saw. The financial forensics came next. The deposits, the shell companies, the patrol schedules that aligned with suspicious regularity with Councilman Marsh's Tuesday meeting nights, the C-ray purchased in cash in a transaction that the forensic accountant described with forensic understatement as inconsistent with the defendant's documented income. Marcus took the stand on the third day and answered every question with the same measured clarity he had maintained throughout, describing the stop from the first appearance of Unit 7's lights in his mirror to the moment the handcuffs went on, each detail precise, each procedural violation named and placed in sequence. When Okafor asked him whether he had feared for his life during the stop, he paused just briefly and said, "I did." Officer Pruitt's behavior communicated to me clearly that the facts of the situation were not going to protect me. Only compliance was going to keep me alive. He looked at the jury when he said it, not at Pruitt. And I want the people on this jury to understand what it means to be in that position, to know exactly who you are, to know exactly what the law says, and to understand that none of that is going to matter if you make the wrong move. The jury looked at Pruitt. The look was not charitable. Pruitt's defense was built around the argument that the stop had been a genuine mistake, a miscommunication in a high-pressure situation, a reasonable officer's reasonable response to ambiguous circumstances on a dark street. Finch made the argument as well as it could be made. Pruitt took the stand and attempted remorse, his voice thickening at the right moments, his eyes going to the jury with an appeal that had worked for him in the department for years. the appeal of a man who wants you to see his good intentions rather than his actions. Diane Okafor's cross-examination did not attack him. It simply placed his testimony next to his documented record with the patient neutrality of a woman laying tiles. The 6 complaints, the deposits, the patrol schedules, the cash boat, and asked the jury to look at the pattern. Not the mistake. The pattern. The jury looked. They did not look away. The surprise that broke the trial open did not come from the prosecution's prepared witnesses. It came from a man in an orange Department of Corrections jumpsuit and ankle shackles, who shuffled to the witness stand with the specific bitter energy of someone who has decided that if he is going down, he is not going down alone. Councilman Victor Marsh had already been convicted on racketeering charges and was awaiting sentencing. His cooperation in the Pruitt trial had been negotiated as a sentence reduction, but what he brought to the stand went considerably further than anyone in the courtroom, including Marcus, had fully anticipated. Okafor's examination was brief and surgical. She established the relationship between Marsh and Pruitt, established the payment arrangement, and then asked Marsh in the flat factual tone of someone reading from a document whether the arrangement had originated with him. Marsh looked at Pruitt from the witness stand with an expression that was not quite satisfaction. It was older and colder than that. "No," Marsh said. "It wasn't my idea. Dale came to me." The room shifted. Marsh described it precisely. Pruitt had discovered the construction contract arrangement through a tip from a colleague, not through an investigation, but through the kind of informal intelligence gathering that happens when officers spend years embedded in the informal economy of a city. He had gone to Marsh's office not with a warrant, but with a proposal. Pay the monthly fee, Pruitt had explained, and the precinct's patrol scheduling in the North District would ensure that Marsh's Tuesday meetings were never interrupted. Don't pay, and the job sites get raided. Pruitt had organized the patrol schedules himself. He had recruited Rollins and Blaine personally, using the same leverage on them that he had used on Marsh. The whole operation, the protection arrangement, the deposit structure, the careful management of which complaints got investigated and which ones disappeared, had been architected by Dale Pruitt, not by Marsh. Pruitt stood up. His chair tipped backward and hit the floor. He said something that the court reporter noted as incoherent high volume before Judge Howell's gavel came down with a force that suggested she had very little patience left for disorder in her courtroom. The marshal stepped forward. Pruitt was told to sit down and did so only when the alternative became physically obvious. In the gallery, the people who had come to watch the trial looked at him, and in the look there was a specific shift, the moment a jury decides not which version of a man to believe, but which version of a man they are looking at. They had come in thinking about a reckless cop who made a catastrophic error in judgment. They left their seats at the lunch break thinking about an architect. The verdict had been decided before the jury left the room. Everyone in the courtroom knew it. The jury was back in 3 hours and 50 minutes fast enough to communicate something without saying it slow enough to have taken the work seriously. The 4 persons stood and read the counts one by one, and each guilty landed in the courtroom with the weight of something structural giving way, not dramatic, not explosive, but solid and irreversible. The way a load-bearing wall sounds when it finally accepts what has been done to it. 14 counts, 14 guilty verdicts. Pruitt's knees went first buckling slightly, and Morris Finch reached over and steadied him by the arm with the professional compassion of a man who had always known this was coming and had tried anyway. Judge Patricia Howell looked at Dale Pruitt over her reading glasses for a long moment before she spoke. When she did, her voice was not raised. She did not need to raise it. "You did not fail in a moment of weakness," she said. "You built a practice of cruelty over more than a decade, and you called it police work. You used the authority granted to you by the public to protect a criminal enterprise from scrutiny. And when you encountered a man who could not be intimidated by your badge, you fell back on the only tool you had ever truly developed, contempt." She set down her papers. "This court has no interest in your remorse at this stage. It had considerable interest in your behavior over the preceding 11 years. The sentence was 32 years to be served at USP Branton, a high-security federal facility that Pruitt knew by name and whose population he knew by case file because he had put a number of them there. He did not look at Marcus when the sentence was read. He looked at the floor. Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out through the gallery into the afternoon sunlight. On the courthouse steps, reporters converged with microphones and cameras, and he stopped once, just once, and said, "The badge is not a shield, it is a burden. If you drop it, don't expect us to pick it up for you." Then he walked to his car, and the case that had started on a wet road in 9 minutes moved into its final chapter. He was sitting in the car outside the courthouse with the engine running and the heater finally working, thinking about nothing in particular for the first time in months, when the call came through on an unknown number. Voice-distorted cadence, precise grammar too clean for someone who was frightened, which told Marcus something immediately. "You got Pruitt," the voice said. "Good for you. But you didn't get the money. $5 million, Agent Webb, and you are never going to find it." The line went dead. Marcus sat with the phone in his hand and listened to the silence it left behind, and then pulled up the financial forensics report on his secure tablet and scrolled to the section he had reviewed twice already and now read a third time with different eyes. The offshore accounts and the Cayman Islands, he had known about them. They were part of the indictment. But the accounts that had been earmarked for seizure had been accessed and drained in the 2-hour window between the start of jury deliberations and the reading of the verdict. Someone had moved $5 million while every person connected to the case was sitting in a courtroom watching Dale Pruitt try not to cry. He scrolled to the personal data section of Pruitt's file. Spouse, Cheryl Ann Pruitt, née Voss. Occupation, Senior Branch Manager, Birchwood First National Bank. He thought about the morning she had left. The hard-shell suitcase, one bag carefully packed. The charcoal blazer pressed. The complete absence of tears. He had read it at the time as a woman leaving a sinking ship, a reasonable response to a catastrophic situation. He had not paused to consider that she might be the one who had drilled the hole. He called the Port Authority. He identified himself, gave his badge number, and asked for private charter manifests, departures scheduled within the next 60 minutes from any regional airfield. He gave them the name Cheryl Pruitt. Then, glancing at the maiden name in the file, he gave them the name Cheryl Voss. The pause on the other end was brief. There was a Cheryl Voss on a charter departing from Hangar 9 at Mid-Lake Regional Airfield, a private flight to a destination that Marcus recognized immediately as a country with no extradition arrangement with the United States. Wheels up in 19 minutes. "Ground it," Marcus said. "National security hold. Do not let that aircraft move." He pulled out of the courthouse parking structure and drove into the afternoon traffic with the quiet certainty of a man who has done the math and already knows where it comes out. The private airfield was slick with rain that had followed him from the courthouse, and the Gulfstream's engines were already spooled up when Marcus's car cut across the tarmac with the headlights catching the aircraft's nose cone in a wash of white light. He braked hard, stepped out with his badge raised, and the pilot cut the engines with the pragmatic compliance of a man who understood clearly that his contract did not include resisting federal agents. The cabin door opened. Cheryl Voss Pruitt descended the stairs in a tailored coat with a carry-on bag over her shoulder and the specific composed irritation of a woman whose schedule has been inconvenienced. The performance of grief, the exhausted wife who couldn't face the groceries, all of that was gone. What was left was something considerably more interesting. Marcus stood at the bottom of the stairs and waited for her to come to him. She said she didn't know what he was talking about. She said she had filed for divorce that morning. She said she was a private citizen with no criminal record taking a private flight to a legal destination, and if he had a problem with that, he was welcome to call her attorney. Marcus told her about the IP trace, the transfer of $5 million from the offshore accounts executed from a tablet registered to her iCloud credentials during the window of the jury deliberations routed through a series of transfers that were sophisticated enough to delay detection for approximately 18 hours, but not long enough to delay it past the moment Marcus was sitting on the tarmac talking to her. He told her about the maiden name booking on a non-extradition charter. "That's not a vacation," Marcus said. "That's consciousness of guilt. That's flight to avoid prosecution." Something shifted in her face. Not a collapse, but a release, the specific expression of a person who has been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and has just set it down. "He was an idiot," she said, and her voice for the first time sounded like the voice of someone telling the unmediated truth. "He was a bully and a braggart, and he thought that badge made him untouchable. I cleaned up after him for years, covered the deposits, managed the accounts, made sure nothing flagged." She looked at Marcus with something that was almost defiance. "I earned that money." "It's evidence," Marcus said. "And you just explained to me in detail how you knew exactly where it came from." She looked at the aircraft behind her. She looked at the approaching lights of the police vehicles Cole had sent when Marcus called from the car. She held out her wrists. "Is he going to be in there a long time?" she asked. 32 years, Marcus said. A long pause. The rain tapped against the tarmac between them. "Good," she said quietly. The handcuffs closed, and she said nothing more. Several months later, USP Branton was exactly what the name suggested. Hard, loud, institutional, a place built to communicate permanence rather than offer any comfort about it. Inmate 4-0217, formerly Officer Dale Pruitt of the Oak Haven Police Department, had learned quickly and painfully that the men who recognized his name inside these walls were not glad to see him, that the authority he had carried for 11 years was not a transferable asset, and that surviving in this environment required a very different set of skills than the ones he had spent his career developing. He was mopping the cafeteria floor on a Tuesday afternoon when a guard came in and handed him an envelope from the Department of Justice. He set the mop against the wall and opened it. It was a notification of inmate transfer. The transferred inmate's name was Cheryl Voss Pruitt. She had been sentenced to 14 years for money laundering and wire fraud and had been assigned to the women's minimum security camp adjacent to USP Branton, separated from the main facility by a double chain-link fence and 140 yards of open exercise yard, which is not very far at all. Pruitt walked to the window at the end of the cafeteria. Through the fence, through the razor wire, across the gray expanse of the women's exercise yard, he could see a figure in a gray jumpsuit walking alone along the perimeter path, measured unhurried with the same composed purposefulness that had walked through his kitchen with a hard-shell suitcase the morning after the video went live. He pressed his hand flat against the glass. She stopped. She turned her head toward the main building, toward his window. She looked for a moment that was long enough to be certain and short enough to be cold. She did not wave. She turned her back and kept walking. Dale Pruitt slid down the wall and sat on the cold linoleum floor of the cafeteria with his back against the concrete and the notification letter in his hand, and understood in a way that had not been fully available to him until this moment the complete geometry of what he had lost. Not just the badge and the pension and the freedom and the money, but everything, the whole architecture of a life he had built on the assumption that the rules did not apply to him, and he had lost all of it because he had been too proud and too certain to spend 5 seconds looking at an ID. The wind off Lake Michigan in November is not romantic. It is cold and direct and entirely indifferent to what you are feeling. And Marcus Webb stood on the pier at the south end of the lake shore with his collar turned up and his hands in his pockets, looking out at the dark water and thinking about very little, which was a condition he had not been able to achieve for the better part of 4 months and which he had in its absence significantly undervalued. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out. A text from Cole. All assets recovered. Marsh and Pruitt processed. Sutter cleared admin review department under new oversight structure. City council holding special election. You did good, Webb. Marcus read it twice. He put the phone back in his pocket. He did not feel like a hero. He had never found that particular feeling especially useful, and the cases that went well enough to produce it were always followed soon enough by the cases that reminded you why the work was not finished. He felt like a man who had done a difficult job competently and was standing by a lake in November trying to remember what it felt like to be still. He reached into his jacket pocket and found the challenge coin worn smooth from years of handling from the old unit from a time before he had moved up to the work he did now. He turned it over in his fingers, feeling the weight of it, the familiar ridges of its edges. He flipped it up into the cold air, watched it turn over twice, caught it, and put it back. He thought about the 9 minutes on the asphalt, the cold of the metal hood under his hands, the weight of the handcuffs, the specific quality of the silence in the back of Pruitt's cruiser. And then he thought about the millions of people who would have experienced that same stop, the same contempt, the same certainty on Pruitt's face, and would not have had a federal badge in their pocket to change what happened next. That thought was not comforting. It was not supposed to be. He turned up his collar. He walked back toward the city lights. There were other towns. There were other officers who had convinced themselves they ran them. Marcus Webb was, as the saying goes, just getting started. And that is the story of how 9 minutes of unchecked arrogance cost Dale Pruitt his badge, his freedom, his marriage, his money, and the next 3 decades of his life. But here's the thing worth sitting with, the thing that stays with you after the verdict and the footage and the image of the boat being towed away. Dale Pruitt was not a singular monster. He was the product of 11 years of zero consequences of a department that had been taught complaint by dismissed complaint that the badge meant you operated by different rules than the people you were supposed to protect. That is not an excuse. It is an explanation. And the difference matters, because understanding how men like Pruitt become what they become is the only way to stop it from happening again. The tragedy of Dale Pruitt is not that he was stupid. He was not stupid. The tragedy is that he was confident in a way that only total impunity can produce the kind of certainty that comes from never once in 11 years having to look at the consequences of your own behavior and account for them. He walked up to that car on Birchwood Lane, and he saw a black man in a hoodie in a wealthy neighborhood, and every assumption he had ever been allowed to keep, every complaint that had ever been swept away, every colleague who had laughed along, and every supervisor who had looked the other way, all of that was standing right behind him, backing him up, telling him he was right. And he was catastrophically wrong. The tragedy of Cheryl is quieter and in some ways more instructive. She was the smartest person in that story by a significant margin, the one who managed the accounts, structured the deposits, built the infrastructure that made the whole operation survivable. She told herself for years that she was protecting her family, managing a difficult situation, making the best of a marriage to a man who was going to do what he was going to do regardless. She was not a victim. She was a partner who convinced herself otherwise, and the morning she walked out with a suitcase, she had already packed for a different kind of escape than the one she told Dale she was making. The moment that actually changed everything, though the pivot point that the whole story turns on, was not the verdict, and it was not the footage. It was 9 minutes on a wet road when Marcus Webb made a choice. He had every reason in that moment to fight. He was a federal agent. He was in the right. He had credentials 12 inches from Pruitt's hand. He could have argued louder, moved faster, made the kind of decision that would have been completely understandable and very likely fatal. Instead, he went still. He complied. He survived, and he remembered, and he built the case from the asphalt up. Most of the people watching this will never be FBI agents, but most of the people watching this have been in a room or a car or a hallway or a store where someone with authority decided who they were before asking, have had to choose in that moment between speaking and surviving, have had to be smarter and quieter and more controlled than the situation required simply because the alternative was worse. Marcus Webb chose both. He survived the moment and he built the reckoning. That is the lesson. That is what justice looks like when it works. If you have ever been in a moment where someone called the wrong thing and you waited and held on and trusted that the truth would eventually catch up, drop it in the comments below. Because today in this story, it did. If this moved, you hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss when we put one out. We will keep telling these stories for as long as there are people who need to hear them. Stay safe, stay humble. And the next time someone tells you they run this town, let them talk. The FBI usually shows up in 9 minutes.